Okay, we are going to transition to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Vaughn Glitschka. Vaughn is an illustrator and graphic designer in Oregon. And the thing you all know about him most, I suspect, is that every time you use one of the super cool patterns in Adobe Illustrator, he's the one that did that. He also, in all truth and honesty, is the person who I stole the way I teach the pen tool from, which comes from his book, Vector Basic Training. Vaughn, thank you so much for making time for us today. We're glad to have you.
No problem whatsoever.
Just to share with you a little bit about what we do, we are in Colorado Springs. Seth Lockhart and I teach in a program called Career Start. We have juniors and seniors from our area high schools who come learn graphic design with us 5 mornings a week. And so we were going to have a speaker series on campus to end our semester together, where we brought in designers who were working locally. And when we got quarantined, I was like, I could invite people that are not working locally, and we have just been thrilled by the response. It has been super fun. So thank you so much for making time for us today.
No problem.
Tell us.
I normally don't wear a hat, but I haven't been able to get a haircut, so.
You know, we started our conversation with Chip Kidd in very much the same way, but I have. One of the things I have enjoyed a little bit is watching people in their natural environment, in their, like, I haven't showered in, no, that's not true. I haven't showered in a week, but everybody's in t-shirts and jeans, or t-shirts and pajama pants, because you can't see any higher than somebody's waist. And even the TV commentators this morning on whatever my mother had on, Good Morning America or whatever, they were in their own kitchen in t-shirt and jeans, and so the bar of entry for clothing has dropped. Tell us a little bit about your career, how you got started, what you do, and all the things.
Well, I went to art school. At the time when I started, it was called the Burnley School of Art. It was based out of Seattle. Right after I started, they got bought out by the Art Institute, so it kind of morphed into Seattle Art Institute. But I kind of, when I went through school, it was right at the point where digital was coming on the scene. I didn't really touch a computer until the last few terms of art school, and it was working on a Apple Lisa. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh my goodness, yes I do.
Yeah. So I learned everything traditionally, production, everything else that goes along. And I knew I didn't want to become a production artist because I didn't like having to do all the math to figure out how to fit type into a layout.
Yes.
I'm going, this is like, I didn't go to art school to do this. Why is this part in there? But so it started off traditionally, and then when the digital kind of fully came about, at that point I had moved from Seattle to Oregon to work at a small design firm, and all their computers, they were leasing Apples, and so. It was a pretty natural fit, because when I was in high school, before I graduated, I learned how to code on an Apple, and so I was really familiar with the platform. So I kind of took to it pretty quickly, and kind of got up to speed. A big creative that was an inspiration to me early on was a guy out of the UK by the name of Neville Brody. I'm not sure if you know who that is, but he did a lot of, I used Freehand for 15 years, so didn't switch until CS2 when I got contacted by Adobe. I went into an agency in Portland to meet with them, and they wanted me to do these posters for promotion, and they just assumed I used Illustrator, but I was using Freehand. And so I'm sitting in this meeting just going, okay, do I tell them I don't use Illustrator? I don't want to do that. I want to do the project. And so I'm trying to think, well, I could do it all in Freehand and just save out as Illustrator. I did that all the time. But then I'm thinking, well, maybe in pre-press it would come up that it was exported from Freehand. It would be like this creative Watergate thing. So I basically went home from that, didn't tell them, went home from that meeting, updated to the latest version of Illustrator. And it was like that week was kind of my, baptism by fire to get the project done. But there's one thing I couldn't figure out in Illustrator. It was how to make a dotted line. And so that's the only part of my poster I kind of cheated, where I went to Freehand and created it, just copied and pasted it in. A friend of mine worked at that agency, and I told him, I go, I hope you know that I had never done a project from beginning in Illustrator until that happened. So I was like really nervous, and he goes, oh, I totally knew you were a Freehand user. And so he did it because he knew I would be squirming over it. So that's when you know you have good friends. They do that kind of stuff. But I've worked for I worked at that agency for about 7 years. That was here in Oregon. Then I moved down to California, and I worked at a company called Upper Deck, which does sports memorabilia. I was on the Major League Baseball team, so I worked on collectibles and like they did trading cards, everything like that. That was pretty fun because there was a lot of special projects that came in. One of them, they bought a bat from Sotheby's for like $15,000. And they're the first in the industry to buy a historic bat. This one was from Babe Ruth. And then they were going to chop it up into little pieces and put it on the cards. And so before they did that, I go, look, this is like a piece of memorabilia history. So why don't we do a photo shoot? And so we did that so we could show this piece came from this actual bat. But that was always fun because that product would be sent to my office. And, I'm just looking at the bat, and I could see the little notches like Ruth had carved in there for every home run he hit using that bat. And so being able to when nobody was around, I'd take it out and like swing it, So that was kind of cool. The other project I really liked when I worked there was they wanted to do what were called signature cut cards, and that is have Babe Ruth's autograph on it. Well, the only way they could do that is they contacted his estate, and they bought all of these canceled checks from the Ruth estate, and those showed up at my office from FedEx. I opened it up, and it was just a Ziploc bag full of all these like canceled checks from the 1920s. And so like me and a couple of designers are huddled around my desk, and we're just going through like the day in the life of Ruth, seeing what he wrote checks for. And we get to this one, and it was $256 and some odd cents. And it was for the Park City liquor store in New York. And I'm going, hold on. And so I found a calculator online, like, to adjust for inflation, like how much is that equivalent to now? And it was like over $1,000. So he bought over $1,000 in booze for something. It was interesting. That fun. Job was fun. Then I eventually moved back to Oregon, worked at another firm up here as an art director, and kind of caught my daughter's cold over the weekend and came in on Tuesday, and they had my boxes packed. And come to find out, he had looked at my deleted email, and there was another firm in town who had approached me and offered me a job, but I'd already turned it down. Well, come to find out that everybody who worked at that other firm was his former employees.
Oh.
And so he thought I was just going to jump ship. And so he kind of preemptively cut me loose. And that's when I just went out on my own and started my own uh, design firm. And I had been working that way. Actually, lately, I've been telling people I've been creatively quarantined for 18 years. So this isn't too much different right now.
Right?
Other than it's just kind of slowed down. But so I've been running my own firm for 18 years. Most of the work we do is I'm more or less a creative hired gun for other agencies, in-house art departments, other larger design firms. And that said, I have my own clients as well, but most of the work is on behalf of other people. And about 3 years ago, I hired my daughter, so now we work together doing the same thing.
Awesome.
Nice. Nice. I'm having a little personal chuckle because the book to your side, to the side there, is that great big Taschen logo book.
Oh yeah,
I'm
a
like,
Christmas present.
mine's not too far away. Like,
Yeah,
it's over there, but it's over there.
I need to rethink my background in the age of Zoom now, because this looks like it looks horrible. It's just,
well, I will share with you that since I'm teaching online, or teaching all my classes online, I bought a green screen. So although this is a wall of my office, it's not the wall directly behind me.
okay.
It's a photo.
So you actually you're using a picture of another wall, but you got a green screen, so it really cuts it out nicely.
Exactly. It's nice and clean.
That's what I need to do. That's
because
a good idea.
I was like, oh, that's good, because what's really behind me is my art supply closet. Yeah. So I totally understand. Our worlds have changed in some ways where we're like, oh, Zoom is a thing now.
Well, I guess I could do this.
Oh, nice. There you go. It was funny. We were just talking with Chip Kidd, and I considered, I've taught a different location every day. So yesterday I was headless in the Hall of Hogwarts, and but I have the Bat Cave background. I was like, oh, I could talk to Chip Kidd from the Bat Cave. Oh well, attempting to be somewhat professional. It's a stretch. Vaughn, what are some of your favorite projects you've ever worked on?
My favorite type, it's usually what I'm currently working on for the most part. It's hard to nail down one, but I guess it kind of felt like coming full circle. When I grew up, I was in middle school when Dungeons and Dragons came on the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember staying after school and, playing that. And, soon people needed to have characters drawn of who their character was, or at the time it was lead figures. And that was some of my first kind of work that people paid me to like draw or paint for them. And that was a lot of fun. So about 5 years ago, a former guy I shared an office with at Upper Deck is a creative director at Blizzard Entertainment in California now. And he's friends with Wizards of the Coast because they've worked together on projects. And somebody from Wizards of the Coast contacted him and said, hey, David, do you know anybody who could help us rebrand Dungeons and Dragons? And he recommended me. And so I got to work on that. It was about 5 years ago that we rebranded their iconic ampersand dragon. And I was supposed to go on to do all the iconography for the books and the cards and everything. But right after I finished the mark and delivered that art, Hasbro had bought them about a year before that. And they came in and basically fired everybody at Wizards of the Coast and took over the project. and they kept the logo, but I was
Right.
never able to kind of move on to the other part, which kind of bummed me out. But um, yeah, it's kind of fun seeing that it's everywhere. So it's probably the one thing I've done that has kind of gone to a lot of different places. But the projects I really enjoy doing is kind of helping a small business who they might have already been around, and so I'm
Mm-hmm.
rebranding them and just seeing their reaction and how their reality kind of changes once I help them do that. Because they're amazed that people take notice of their new identity once it's out. They're not used to that.
Right.
And so I did that for actually is an HVAC company outside of Chicago. They had originally gone to like one of the online curated creative resources, like 99 Designs, I think
Mm-hmm.
was the one they went to. They really didn't like the experience, didn't like what they got, knew it wasn't as effective as it probably could be. In their frustration, once again, this is a small business, so it's just the husband, his wife, and they have like 5 employees.
Right.
Him and his wife started just looking online to find some information on rebranding and kind of stumbled upon my course that I did for LinkedIn Learning.
Mm-hmm.
They watched it, and then at the end of the course, they said, "Why don't we just have this guy do it
Why
for
don't
us?"
we hire him
Um,
instead?
yeah, I never expected like that to happen from doing
Huh?
stuff for LinkedIn, but he contacted me. I kind of picked his brain to figure out the backstory of how did he find me, and so I said, this is what I'd suggest you do: go back to 99 Designs, ask for a refund, tell them you're not happy, um, because he paid quite a bit
Mm-hmm.
for to do that, but it's so detached and impersonal, and I almost said remote, but I work remotely all the time. That they gave him a refund, and I just told them, this is how I'm going to help you. I'll rebrand you, and I'll use that same budget. And so they were pretty happy. They decided to do that, but the very next morning, I could just tell he had been burnt already. And so he
Mm-hmm.
was like, okay, I don't really know this Vaughn guy. And, and they wanted to pull back again. And so I took a little risk, and I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm still going to work on it for you, and let's just handle it this way. If you don't like it, you don't have to pay for it. And he figured that's no risk, so we did it. It's only one and only time I've ever done that, by the way. That's not something I make a habit of. But they were like really blown away by what I created for them. Once it rolled out, and we did it everywhere. We uh, his main avenue for his identity is his vehicles which were horrible before. So we wrapped, at the time he only had 2 vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
And so I created a nice kind of tie-in to his vehicles with the new branding. We created a character for him as well. And one thing that I like to call design psyops is I put a number 8 on his vehicle as if it's part of a fleet of vehicles he has, but he only had 2. And so he asked me, why is the 8 on there? I don't get that. And I go, well, that's just to, intimidate your competition. And he's like, oh, I like that. And so we've been doing that as he grows and he adds more vehicles. We keep doing that. So I think the largest number he used is 20 something now. He only has, I think, 8 now, but his
That's brilliant.
competition thinks he's just getting out. But the response has been this. We launched that in August about about 3 years ago now. And by the end of that year, in December, when we relaunched it, he had doubled his revenue. And so that kind of won him over. He really understood the importance of marketing specifically, but also just having an identity that kind of works for you.
Right.
And he had competition coming up to him saying, did you buy into a franchise? Because it looks like he has franchise quality
design work,
visual
yeah,
now.
visuals,
And
branding.
The other part that was really cool was, part of the process of kind of diving into how they operate, who their audience is, what their audience says about them, is kind of how we developed his name. In the process of asking him a bunch of questions, he kind of revealed that his clients tend to refer to him as a one-stop shop. And I was thinking about that, and I'm going, I like the one-stop. You're not really a shop. And so I just started doing some name exploration and discovered that One Stop Pro, nobody owned that domain. It was available. And so I called him immediately and I said, you need to go buy this domain. This is your new name. I can't even believe this name is available, but this is franchise worthy. He did, and he's been doing great. We continue to do advertising and promotional stuff for him. He's one of those kind of entrepreneurs that is always coming up with these little, almost viral marketing ideas, and so we're helping him with that as well. But it's just fun to work with a small business who gets excited when they realize they can be just as effective as a multinational.
Nice. That's a great story. And one of the things that I love about that is the power of design, because good design really is, I think, as we become more and more and more visual, really important. Let's see, I have my list of questions here. We're getting ready at our school to do a portfolio review, which for obvious reasons has become an online project. What students do you have, or what tips do you have for students as they prepare their portfolios? Any suggestions?
Really try to get across in your book that it's easy to polish things and that's all you show, but I always enjoy seeing a page that shows kind of your thinking behind something. So maybe cherry pick a project and just kind of visually walk them through, how you thought through that, your sketches, anything about the research. It's all about, Saul Bass is, Chip kind of touched on this, but Saul Bass, his famous quote is, thinking made visual. That's what design's all about. So I enjoy seeing how they think, how they process ideas. And of course, I always say, and Chip touched on this too, I think it's really important not just to know what you believe in terms of your convictions about design, but why you believe that. Why is it important to do this type of research, or anything like why do you use grids? What's that have to do with anything? And it's interesting because there's a few different design programs that I teach in every year. Not this year, everything got canceled, but there's a master's program in Connecticut at the Hartford Art School that I teach in every summer. And I'm always amazed by the lectures that they invite people in to lecture on different things. And it made me individually realize that you know, some of my teachers in art school weren't that great. And I was blown away by some of the stuff I was learning along with the students, just going, why is this the first time I'm ever hearing this? And but there's other things like that I've noticed throughout the years. And the whole reason I'm bringing it up now is because school is great. You learn some of the fundamentals that you're not going to learn everything, but
Mm-mm.
as long as you learn a good solid foundation, you can build upon it. As you start working, you're going to see seasoned veterans you'll work with, and you're the newbie, but you'll see how they work, how they approach things, and just start cherry picking the things that are working great for them, and adopt it into your own system. That's there's a quote that kind of came to my mind when I was going through art school, and I started thinking like that, and I kind of caught myself. I started making some friends here and there, and then I caught myself kind of just naturally picking up on some of the things they did, and it made me think each one's personality creates another is kind of the quote that popped in
Mm-hmm.
my head. And that's really true when it comes to your creative process and your uh, how your workflow, how you approach things, how you think about things, how you develop the way you work best. Not that everybody has to do it the same way, but um, you're going to have to find out for yourself the best way that you can approach a project. And the earlier you can do that, the better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like you're going to figure everything out, but just always be open to go, wow, I really like how they handled gathering information the way they do. Well, there's something you can put into your, uh, as Bill Gardner from Logo Lounge says, your chamber. Just drop it in and apply it to your next project. Um, that's pretty much what I've been doing for the last 18 years as I work with agencies. I get to read through all these briefs and see how they structure things, and not everything is great, but then I see that one jewel in
Mm-hmm.
the way they work, and I go, wow, that is a great way to handle it. And I've tried to cherry pick those things and kind of put together my own, but it's not out of the blue. It's based off of how I've seen other people use it and benefit from it. So when you're putting once again, getting back to when you're putting your portfolio together, kind of reveal to people how you think and how you got somewhere, because that's going to show them, yeah, I can see you can do really polished work, but how do you work when you're facing the challenge of coming up with an idea
Mm-hmm.
and formulating your thoughts and all that. I think that's probably the one thing I've noticed that is lacking in a lot of programs is the focus on um, kind of just the thinking process, just working through problems, and how do you come up with a good idea? Um, how do you formulate your thoughts, and how can you put together concepts or make relationships and kind of take that thinking and make it visual? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of people that struggle with that because it's very individual. What I've learned since going out on my own is I've learned more about myself in terms of how I can best facilitate that than I ever did the previous 15 years working for other people, because
Mm-hmm.
I was always trying to align with their set way of working.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
Not that it's wrong, it's just you really have to figure that out for yourself, because within the context of somebody else's expectations, you can work a lot better.
I think in some respects, this whole quarantine experience is really a beautiful opportunity for a lot of people to figure that out, to sort of start going, okay, how do I work best? How does my thought process work? Seth and I are work really hard to be heavy in the thought process, because I agree that seems to be the thing. I think especially as we move toward more and more standardized testing, in the standard educational system, then all of a sudden you go to college and we're like, and now you need to think for yourself. So
Yeah.
we spend a lot of time really focusing on that idea generation work, because I agree it's so important. What are some of your favorite tips? What are some of your favorite I was thinking about this as you were telling the story about moving from Freehand to Illustrator, because I think that although Adobe is very much the industry standard right now, Freehand was the industry standard until Adobe bought them, until they bought Macromedia, and then shut Freehand down pretty quickly thereafter.
Actually, they've bought Adobe bought Freehand twice.
Did they really?
Yeah, back in the day when Freehand started, it was created based out of Seattle. When I was in art school, a friend of mine was a beta tester, and so that was the first time I saw that program. Any program like that was in the Smith Tower in Seattle in his office. But at the time, it was. Now I'm trying to depend on my memory, and I haven't had coffee yet. I can't remember. Oh, I see the logo in my head, but I can't remember the name that was under it. That's how my brain works. Oh, this is going to drive me nuts now. It's, anyway, whatever that company.
Was it Aldous? Aldous Freehand.
Yeah, that's it. Aldous.
There you go.
So they bought Aldous, and then the Federal Trade Commission came in and said, no, you can't own the two primary suite of tools in your industry, and they forced them to sell it. And so they turned around and sold it to, I can't remember who, which ended up becoming Macromedia. And then they bought them again later. And then the Federal Trade Commission didn't care, I guess. They didn't stop it. So
I've always told my students, I'm like, you need to learn the thought process, because the tool you have today may not be the tool you're using tomorrow. And I've just watched the industry change like that.
That's so true. Yeah.
I chuckled a little bit. Anytime I show a video to my students, and I'm a firm believer in building I call it your visual vocabulary, knowing lots of design styles, knowing lots of design history, being really familiar with lots and lots of designers. Just because I feel like it's exactly the same as learning to read. The more words you have, the more in-depth stories you can tell. But it's funny. I don't know where I was going with that. It went away. So
no, I understand the gist of what you're saying. Yeah.
Oh, I was. The number. So I always stop if we're watching a video when a designer says, oh, I bid on that job, but I still had my Photoshop wrapped in cellophane on my desk. I didn't really know how to use it yet. Because I think it's important for students to know that you're going to bid on jobs that you don't feel wholly qualified for, but it shouldn't stop you from doing them anyway. It's kind of the way of the world.
I've quoted jobs. In the very process of quoting, I'm thinking, I don't know how I'm going to pull this off. But it's a great way to force yourself to learn new things, and also it also forces you to think, well, it helps you business wise, because early on when I started my own firm, there wasn't a ton of user interface icon designers. It was really a specialized kind of field, and I just happened to be friends with a firm that did a lot of the icons at that time period back in 2003, 2004. Now there's a ton of them, but they would get these small independent software companies approaching them. They were busy working on Microsoft and Apple, and they didn't have time for it, so they'd push it my way. Well, I'm okay when it comes to the art and science of iconography when you're working in 32 by 32 pixels. But when it comes to the 16 by 16, that's like, that just, I didn't like doing that. And so I found somebody who could do a great job. His name was Brian Brasher. And I would just farm out all that to him. So when I quoted it, I just mark it up, farm it out to him, pay him. And so it's like I learned a lot about just running a creative agency. It's not always about if you can do everything. You have to kind of think in a business way. And if I would have just said, no, I can't do that, and just turned it down, well, that's pretty dumb business wise. So there's a lot of things like that that I do at times where I have a limited capacity of how much work I can get done. That's one reason why I hired my daughter. But there's been times where, like, the Lifetime channel needed a logo type done for, this goes back about 8 years now, but I couldn't do it all. I couldn't do all the exploration. So what I did instead is I hired two other who I consider illustrative designers to work with me, my friend Paul, my friend Tim, and we all worked on the project together. We all kind of figured out the budget when we quoted it, so we all knew what our take in it was going to be. But so I've done that at times where I've ramped up our ability to deliver certain work for a specific project. So yeah, the one thing I'd recommend, if you don't, well, I always try to recommend, if you're getting out of art school, I think it's better suited if you look for a job for an existing firm or agency first. You want some of that experience. That's part of the process of learning, I think.
Yes.
I think too many people just immediately go freelance, and it's going to be a lot rougher road if you go that way. So I can't remember why I was saying this now.
I have always sort of viewed your first job, which is usually some grunt production job where you're not doing exactly what you thought you would do, as it's sort of the boot camp of real life. I read somewhere that you could, if you wanted to be a designer, you could teach yourself and learn it in 15 years, or you could go to school and learn it in 5. And I think in some ways there's some truth to that, but the flip side of that is you still need that, like, on the job, the projects that come in the door, the personalities that you have to work with, being told by your client, I don't like it, or learning how to just suck it up and do it sometimes, or learning how to argue your perspective in a way that is effective. I think those are things that you learn on the job with a safety net instead of on your own with, high wire, no net.
Yeah, I made my biggest design mistakes for other people.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a good point. It's like at this point in my life, I always get people I knew in high school, college, former employers all mixed up now. I can't remember what category they fit in.
Where they were.
Yeah. I'll get a Facebook invite and I go, I know that person. Which, and then I'm thinking, okay, was it high school? Was it?
Yep, exactly. What are your favorite kind of projects to work on?
I mean, this might surprise people, but I love working on logo design, branding specifically, just because it's like solving a mystery. I never know where it's going to go. I don't know what's going to pop up to be challenging, but I like the challenge aspect to it. I like trying to fulfill my satisfaction while meeting a client's expectation. And so it's always, I've had projects go off the rails like anybody, but it's just so rewarding after you're done and it's launched. There's a local entrepreneur here who bought a really retro bowling alley from the owners who are retiring, and he's turning it into a youth center. So I'm helping him brand that, and it's just fun being part of I don't know, creating an entity and helping somebody create an entity, their company, their vision, and then being able to see it live and breathe as it moves forward with what you created for it, kind of being the forward facing visual to the community. So that part, I think that's the type of project I enjoy the most. I love to illustrate, but usually the type of illustration I do mostly now is in the context of branding, where it's an agency. They might need a character. Well, a specific one like that, 2 years ago, we did the brand character for Kiwi shoe polish. Like, and that was like growing up, that was like, I always saw the cans because my dad used them. And so that kind of felt a lot of this. It was kind of like coming full circle, like something you engaged with when you're a kid and you remember, and then, wow, I'm kind of helping that company now. That's kind of cool. So those happen I don't get those type of projects all the time. But those are fun to work on because usually when you work with an agency, there's not a lot of hand holding. They know exactly what needs to be done. They know what you can do. They give you the information. They let you do your job, and then you deliver it, and kind of out of sight, out of mind. Small business is you kind of have to hold their hand at times and really explain things. So because they're not creative people, they don't understand. They know they need it, they just don't understand it. So once you get them to the point where they realize what these terms mean, branding, equity, all that kind of stuff in the context of their identity, and they see it working, they become great clients. There's a local company here in Oregon. It was just, when it started, it was just her and her husband. Her husband had just gone through brew mastery program, I forget where. She was a marketing director for another company, so she already understood marketing and why it's important, and design and how it works with it. And we met. I knew they were just starting out. They're not going to have a ton of money, so I knew they were going to go somewhere because she knew how to do the marketing. So I just told them, how about this? I'm going to help you get your identity up and going. And then when you can afford it, I'll start charging for what I'm doing for you. That took maybe 3 years, but they now have like 14 employees. The craft brewery is doing great. They've gone on to do distilling. And so I created all the branding and graphics for their liquor line. She just sent me a list of projects for other things coming up. And so those have been a lot of fun. And because she sees the success and what they're doing and how it's worked, she pretty much gives me full reign. So I couldn't ask for anything more. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I think it's really cool when you can be involved in a project early on and then watch it grow, and the workload grows with it, which is always, well, not always, but sometimes a really nice part of that. Talk to me a little bit about your process. When you get a new project, where do you start?
Well, usually it starts with, like, I'll get an email and they're asking, we want to rebrand. And so I quote it. I have, I do that so much that I kind of have a preset, prefabricated letter that I'll go into, and I'll just customize a few things specifically for them. But overall, it covers, it explains what they can expect, how I work. There's a page on my site I point them to. Give them examples of similar projects, but letting them know that you're not going to see the exact same context as yours. This just shows you I can apply the same process and thinking to any type of industry, product, or client. Whether it's a branding, whether it's an illustration, whether it's whatever type of project it is, I tend to take the same approach in terms of process. It's quoting. If they approve that, then it goes into research and strategy phase. Now, if I'm working for an agency, I don't have to do any of that. They're just hiring me as a hitman for one specific thing. I just deliver it. But when it's my own project and I'm managing it, then yeah, it starts with quote, research, strategy, and then development, ideation. It gets into the craftsmanship part about it, really about thinking, working out sketches, kind of distilling ideas. Once I've locked in a certain realm of ideas that I want to develop to present, then I start building them. That gets into the craftsmanship part. And then I present them, comps, and then any revisions, finalizing all the assets after a project has been approved and revised and green-lighted, delivering all of that. And then from that point going forward, helping them not only manage it, but create additional assets to help facilitate it. So that's usually what I do. That process doesn't much change other than the fact of what the specific type of project is, whether it's a logo, maybe it's a series of icons for badge icons for for a company to use internally to award people. It's the same kind of generalized process. And actually, now that you bring that up, I'm going to be developing a course for LinkedIn. I haven't started working on it yet, but it's going to be about kind of just that, about encouraging people to take whatever they want that I'm going to be showing, but, really dial it in for themselves, because that's how it becomes, for lack of a better term, muscle memory. I don't literally figure, okay, here's ideation phase. It's just so natural now that I know where I'm at when I look at any project. I'm kind of here in my process or here. So like today, I'm in the in part of the process for that recreation center, pulling together all the logo assets, creating the style guide, and doing a mock-up, telling him how he should do the sign, because he went to a sign shop before he had any of this done. It looks horrible. So
I laugh only because that's so sadly common.
Yeah. Yeah, that half the reason why you have bad logos is because it's a small business who they only think about a logo when they go, oh, we need a sign. And so the sign shop just to get the sale, oh, we'll design it for you, that kind of thing. I see a business start in town and I'm driving by it just going, that's, oh, geez, just,
okay.
just irritates me. By the way, I do want to say this because, I try to put our best foot forward on our site, and I'm trying to show potential. This is the quality you can have. That doesn't mean that that's the only work we've done. We've done a lot of other work that it'll never go on my site because I don't like how it turned out because the client insisted on something that they didn't listen to me.
Make it bigger, make it bigger.
Yeah, or just some projects where I know it's not anything great, but they need it. And I always use this as an example. And this was the guy I shared an office with at Upper Deck. Before he went to Upper Deck, the one who's now at Blizzard, he worked for a ad agency in Hollywood Boulevard.
Mm-hmm.
And his specific account he had to work on was the AM/PM account. And AM/PM headquarters, that's where they're located. And this was before large format printing was even around. So
Right.
he had to mock up these full-size posters that you see hanging on the outside the store saying 2 hot dogs, 99 cents.
Yep.
And he's mocking this stuff he's telling me how he cut out the color film and mock up a full-size version. He had to drive down to AM/PM, get a ladder out, put it up against the building, go up there, slide it down into the frame. And then he'd take his flip phone and he would call the CEO, not the art director, not a marketing director, no, the CEO of AM/PM. And he'd drive by in his limousine and then he'd give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. That's how they did their approvals.
Oh my goodness.
I thought that was hilarious. And he said, I knew I needed to get a new job where I was there one day. I'm up on the thing, getting ready to slide the thing down. Well, right next to the store is a retaining wall, and there's an alley on the other side of it. And as he is up there sliding it down, he looks down into the alley, and there's a homeless guy sleeping there, just looking up at him, going, "That looks good, man." And he said, I knew I had to get a new job at that point.
Thank God for digital comps.
Yeah, really, right?
I'm so glad those days are over. The days of like, I can't just email it to you, or I can't print it big enough, or I can't, yeah, that's too funny. Gosh, okay. My standard question for everyone. I'm a voracious reader. Do you have any book recommendations? Do you read? Do you have books you like? Okay, good.
I made a goal about a decade ago that I wanted to read 300 books in the next decade, and I'm almost at 400 now. So
nice.
Yeah, I read all the time.
Nice.
Well, what kind of genre?
Yes. Whatever books you like.
I'll give you a few, because I like both. I like fiction, of course, but I also like nonfiction. I just read David McAuliffe did a great nonfictional book called The Pioneers, which was, I think of the time period, the 13 colonies have settled, and they're now moving westward into America before Lewis and Clark, and they're going to the Ohio Territory. It was just fascinating, just kind of taking a peek at that period of time and, learning. So one thing that set me off on a rabbit trail as I was reading the book was those pioneers get to that area and they make a relationship with the local Indians and the chief. And one of the guys is looking where to place his homestead, and he finds all these mounds and ruins and everywhere. And they go to the chief and they said, "Hey, what are those mounds and ruins all about?" And the chief goes, those were here before we were. We don't know what they are. And then that made me curious. I go, well, what are those? And so I looked up and found out there's a whole civilization that existed prior to these Native Americans coming in that area, and it's called the Hopewell civilization. So that was kind of cool. Wow. I like that kind of stuff.
I like that you fall down rabbit holes.
That's pretty much my life. A fictional, I really love Michael Connolly as an author. He was a crime beat reporter for the LA Times for about 15 years. And on the side, like most writers like that, working on a novel. His first book was called Black Echo, and it's Hieronymus Bosch as his character, homicide detective. Really fun reads because they're super authentic since he reported about all that stuff.
That's cool.
Another guy that I discovered, I'm always on the look for authors, and I was flying back from speaking somewhere, and I was on the plane. I was reading an article in the In-Flight magazine. It caught my attention because the title of it was Zone of Death. And I go, well, what's that about? And I started reading it. Well, there's an area of Yellowstone that overlaps 3 states, and none of those states will take jurisdiction of that area.
Oh.
So it's always in this limbo. And then it mentioned in the story that a lawyer killed his wife and disposed of the body in that area, and then he turned himself in, but none of the jurisdictions would prosecute him. Long story short, he kind of got away with it. And so it mentioned even an author has written a book using this as the premise, and that author's name was C.J. Box. And I was going, who's that? I've never heard of him. And I looked him up. Man, his books are awesome. It's all about his character is a game warden in Wyoming, but
cool.
They're really well written, really great stories. So those would be. Oh, and of course, David. I don't know if you've ever read James Lee Burke novels.
No.
Oh my gosh, the master of. Like, I took a writing course one time a few years back, and one of the things the lady who taught the course said, you don't want to be over descriptive when you're describing things. And I'm thinking, I'm like, hold on. I go, what about James Lee Burke? That's why I like him. He does that all the time. Oh, well, that's James Lee Burke. If you're good at it, you can get away with it. And it's totally true. It's like just a little snippet of one of them that I really liked of his. Some guy has another guy pinned on the ground, and he's talking to him, and he described his breath as a warm stack of pennies.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
That's
no,
cool.
he's a brilliant author.
Okay.
James Lee Burke.
Okay. I think maybe our last question. I don't know. You mentioned taking a creative writing class. What other kinds of classes would you suggest students take in addition to design classes?
Writing would be a good one, or at least getting a Grammarly account and run all your text through it. Yeah.
Yeah. Grammar. It's funny. Because I'm old-ish. I always will tell my students, when I was your age, I had to paste up my work. I had to use an X-Acto knife. I had to use a card catalog at the library. The encyclopedia was where we got information. So I think there's something to that. I love Grammarly because it makes me sound like I know what I'm doing.
I'm always surprised when I run text to it. And, what? I got it all right?
Yeah.
I'm like,
look at
cool.
that. Look at that. You can plug it right into your Chrome browser, so it fixes it right on the fly, too.
Yes.
So, all righty. I think that's all the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for making time for us. I really appreciate it.
No problem whatsoever.
Thank you, and have a great day.
Thanks,
You
Fawn.
too. Stay safe.
You too.
You too, buddy.